Welcome to another episode of Give Me Five, the show all about artists and their influences. I'm your host, John Campbell. For those who haven't seen the show before, each episode I sit down with a creator from a variety of artistic mediums and ask them to name 5 works of art that have shaped them as artists. This week, I am thrilled to welcome a very talented man and one of my closest friends, Brendan Jones. You might know Brendan from his cult classic comic book series, Breakfast of the Gods, or as the director and chief archivist of the Tesla City Stories, a recreation of obscure 1940s radio programs currently going into its 10th year of production. Now, for full transparency, I am one of the cast members of this unique show, but I would be singing its praises even if I wasn't. Our season premiere is September 13th at the Old Church Concert Hall here in beautiful Portland, Oregon. You're going to want to head to teslatix.com. There you can get tickets for this show as well as the entire season that we're doing. A lot of fun stuff coming up there. But without further ado, here's Brendan Jones to Give Me Five. Brendan Jones, welcome to Give Me Five.
I will do this one more time. Hey, John.
Yeah.
Up top.
There you go. Yeah. Virtual
That was
high
weirdly
five.
satisfying.
That was. Yeah. You know what? I still felt it even through the screen.
Yeah, no, I felt it went right down my arm. Just a vibration.
Brendan, I was saying to you in maybe the first take of this that didn't get recorded.
Yeah, this is our second go around, guys.
Yeah.
Not for the entire show.
No,
so
just for the intro. But I was
okay.
saying this is the second episode of the show, and on these first 2 episodes, I've had people who I'm pretty close friends with.
Yes.
You and Mr. Ibrahim Mustafa. So part of my side of it has been kind of going like I think I have a guess of what. I'm not going to say I know what the 5 are going to be, but I think if you gave me a few, I could nail at least a couple. I think I got 2 on Ibrahim.
Yeah, and that's impressive. But that again, you know us, so we're friends of yours, and it makes perfect sense that you'd have some idea.
But kind of the fun of it is, and I'm thinking this might be the case on this too, is there is stuff that maybe even surprised you when you put the list together.
It did. I gotta say, for anyone listening that will eventually be talking to John about the same thing, it's difficult to pin down 5 things, much less if you have various creative outlets and things you've done. Like, for instance, none of the ones I'll be talking about today tie into music at all, and I've been in bands and been a singer.
Well,
none of it ties in really to some of it ties into art, but I mean, really, it just depends on what I was thinking of to talk to you about.
And that's why I'm always like, that's why it's like, give me 5. It's not a top 5. It's not the 5 most important.
Right.
It's just pull 5 that means something to you. And the thing that the show is designed to be is not necessarily from fields you work in either, right? I like the idea of a musician can come on and talk about a film that means something to them. A playwright can talk about a comic book or whatever, that kind of stuff.
I know that I was saying before in the previous take. I have a feeling you're going to know one of them.
Previous take was I have some ideas. Well, I definitely know larger, because that's the thing about these are works, individual works, right?
Yeah.
So I definitely know some larger things that have influenced you.
Yes.
Properties, characters, authors. And things
you're going to be so surprised that one name will not even come up.
That's interesting. I think I have no. So, Brendan, let's kick it off. Let's pull. What's the first thing? Once again, as always, there's no ranking of these, no anything. So just give me one of the 5, right? Let's go.
Okay. Well, one of the 5 is, this isn't surprising to, I mean, as far as what milieu it's in is not going to surprise anybody, but it's pretty specific. It's not the first comic I ever read, but it was formative, and that was Giant Size Spider-Man #1 from 1974.
Wow.
Giant Size Spider-Man and Dracula.
Oh, well, that's a name I definitely expected to hear. So I think I know what the other name I won't be hearing is then.
Right. Here's the thing. I mean, for those who don't know who I am at all, I write. I'm a writer, and I've written screenplays and teleplays, none of which have been produced. Don't worry about it. Don't bother going on IMDb. I haven't sold the thing.
because yeah, I'm glad you stopped that because people are gonna go, I like this guy. I gotta see the movies he's written.
Yeah, no, don't worry about it. I've done some comics, and comics from when I was a child, probably due to my brother. When you have an older brother, they blaze the trail. I know that you have a younger sister, so it's not the same for you. But
no, but it's but I recognize that in her, like her comic
yes,
fandom,
exactly.
100% came from me.
Yeah, and it's just whatever they like, you tend to, even if it doesn't become a lifelong thing. But in the case of Robin, he was reading comics before I was, and our mother was begrudgingly reading comics to us. She still hates comics, but she realized that we were enthusiastic readers, and that encouraged her.
Yes.
So comics, really, right out of the I just said out of the grave. Well, that's not it. Out of the womb. Let's reverse.
You do age in a Benjamin Button situation.
Yes, it's Benjamin Button.
Brandon's about 17 right now. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a very youthful 17.
He came out of the grave.
But this comic in particular, I would have been 5 years old when it came out. When I looked up the date it came out to when I thought of this issue to talk about, it was like, oh, I was only 5. So this is early, but I was already well versed in DC and Marvel. I already knew what those characters were, and I had favorites and so forth. The reason this one influenced me was simply because of it was one of the first times my brain opened up to anything can happen in these things and worlds can collide. And you who've read some of my fiction and scripts and things like that, for me, the idea that characters from other universes or genres can cross over and meet each other, that sounds like such a basic idea. But when you're a kid, and I already knew Dracula at 5 as a character from Halloween time where you'd see posters, and I'd maybe seen, not at 5, I doubt I'd seen any of the movies, but he showed up in Electric Company, and he showed up in, Sesame Street, and so Dracula, I knew who he was, hadn't read the novel or any of that stuff, but I was already fascinated with this vampire guy. And then a comic comes out, and this is pretty fresh on the heels of Marvel deciding, hey, let's bring back classic monsters because we can. Comics code be damned.
Right.
So in the 70s, Tomb of Dracula started in 72. And I think my brother wasn't a huge Dracula fan, but somehow I probably had seen an issue or two. But this is the first time a superhero I knew was meeting one of my all-time favorite spooky characters. And I gotta say, I picked this comic. It's not good.
No. It doesn't. Yeah, but just in concept. I mean, that's something we both share is a love of like this thing and that thing, and they know each other.
Yeah, like... it's I mean, especially when you're forming, your imagination is being sparked by things. But even as a kid, I knew there were divisions between DC and Marvel. I knew that Superman would not meet Spider-Man. Hilariously, in just a couple of years they would.
Yeah.
But I mean, the thing is that I knew that these things did not work together. Right. I knew that Frankenstein's monster would not suddenly walk up and shake Donald Duck's hand.
I mean,
I don't think they have yet.
Not yet. Well, Disney doesn't own everybody just yet. Give it time. But no, we talked about that on Meet the Monsters. I definitely had that with Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. I was like,
yes,
they're in the same movie, even though they are both monsters. You're like, whoa, this is the battle of Titans.
And then it becomes a Reese's Peanut Butter Cup.
Yeah,
and
Godzilla versus King Kong was like that too. I remember seeing that on TV as a kid. Like,
similar to Godzilla versus Kong. The thing that that this sparked, this one comic, is similar to your feelings on Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. Which is, it sounds awesome, and then they drop the ball and don't give you what you want.
Yeah.
Because even at 5, reading this comic, which had me spellbound.
Yeah.
At 5, I'm stunned by it. It's just so awesome, and there's still some good art in it. I can remember panels.
Yeah.
Spider-Man gets a lot of great Spider-Man moments. Dracula gets some great Dracula moments. But here's the problem: they actually don't meet. They don't fight in this issue.
Who would want that?
Peter Parker bumps into Dracula on board this ocean liner. And that's the entirety of their interactions. They are
I feel like that should be page 1 and then it goes from there, but
the story very basically is Aunt May is once again sick.
what?
Yep,
Jeez.
and she needs some virus, some sort of vaccine
Yeah.
that's been created by this brilliant scientist who is world famous. Yet Peter Parker doesn't know what the scientist looks like; only has the name. And that
Alucard?
scientist, no, that scientist is on the way to New York on this luxury liner, but won't get there fast enough. So Spider-Man goes to Johnny Storm. You love it. Gets a jump jet, borrows a jump
Of
jet
course.
from the FF, flies
Take
over
keys. You're good.
over the ocean liner, drops down as Spider-Man, and then changes into Peter Parker to blend in with everybody. And he's on a hunt to find this, doctor.
Mhm.
Now Dracula. This is something I love. It's the middle of the Atlantic. Dracula, with only as a bat,
Yeah.
flaps onto the ship,
Yeah.
and I'm like, what did you do during the day? Because I know bats can't really cross hundreds of miles. And
That's so funny because my immediate assumption is, oh, he must have been like in the cargo hold in his coffin.
no, he catches up to the ship also.
Brilliant.
And he's also after the doctor because this vaccine will somehow affect vampires. It's probably a blood thing.
What
And-
doesn't at Marvel, you know?
Yeah, and Dracula's like, I'm going to kill that doctor, make sure that is destroyed. So on board the ship, yes, very early on, they bump into each other, and it's really just thought balloons of like Peter Parker. He goes, "Oh, sorry," but his thought balloon is like, "Man, that guy's a real grouch," and Dracula's like, "Don't let this happen again." And his thought balloon is like, "Arrogant young pups," or whatever, that kind of thing. And then they both pursue the doctor, and there's also, this is what you were expecting, a costume ball on the ship, which allows Spider-Man to get back into Spider-Man, and people that see Dracula go, "That's a great outfit. You should go and you'll get first place."
I think we've seen like 8 movies that have done that on Meet the
Yes.
Monsters, too.
Well, it's also costume party and Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein.
yes, where apparently Abbott had a very realistic wolf mask to
Yes,
the point that people
very
started hunting him.
He was a friend of Jack Pierce.
Yeah.
Anyway, so essentially, and there's the third leg, because that would be nonsense if there wasn't anyone for them to go up against. The mob is also after this doctor.
Well, Dracula
there's
and the mob have had problems for a long time, pal.
Yes. So Spider-Man ends up fighting mobsters, as does Dracula, unaware of each other's existence on the ship. My favorite part of it is pretty grim and pretty awesome, is that he gets shot through and he's like, that had no effect.
Of course.
Then he hypnotizes the mobsters, and The Shadow stole this, the movie The Shadow, years later. He basically goes, "Don't you want to go take a walk?" And they are dressed up as tin soldiers, the mobsters, at the costume thing. But they literally march off the ship and drown to their... And I'm like, oh, that's a good Dracula.
That's pretty rad. That's better represented than
totally
Dracula in most movies we see him in. So
anyway, so the way it wraps up is, it turns out that Dracula grabs the guy he's convinced is the doctor, throws him off the ship, and then goes, "I did it." And then he just goes away. He flaps away. He's like, "I have succeeded." He's wrong. Spider-Man is clinging to the outside of the ship when that happens, and happens to catch that guy, so he doesn't die. And it turns out that the doctor is the sexy lady girlfriend of the guy that was thrown off the ship.
So Dracula's a sexist.
Exactly. And kind of Spider-Man was too, because he
Yeah.
never suspected it would be a sexy lady.
Right.
And she's dressed as like a like Brunhilde, like a Valkyrie.
Oh, of course. Of course.
But anyway, yeah, she's got a metal bra on.
Yeah.
But essentially, he wins, and Aunt May is going to be fine. Don't worry about it. That was a long way to go. I wasn't necessarily inspired by the story.
Right.
There was some good, I think, Ross Andrew art, possibly.
I always assume, once we talk about this a lot with older comics, the art is almost always the highlight of comics.
Yeah, though again, I do think both characters were treated well. It's just that having them not actually interact is the biggest what?
Who thought that was a good idea? Like, I mean,
And I
like,
think
that
this
would have cost them
comic-
nothing.
I know. I think this comic actually was the the beginning of what would become Marvel team up. They were like, "Ooh, what if we have Spider-Man meet characters every month?"
I mean, great idea.
So another good launching pad. Regardless, this was inspirational to me simply because Dracula is my number one. Spider-Man's not my number one hero, but I'm sitting there going like, "Are you kidding me? They can meet," and that literally has never left me.
No.
That to this day, I love a crossover. I famously have half of a novella where Buck Rogers ends up on Mongo.
That makes more sense. My favorite crossover of yours, though, is the Home Alone Die Hard one.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a pioneering fan fiction author simply because I was writing stories like that before that term existed, but
Right.
I'm sure everyone has.
Well, and now everything. The thing is now that's the norm, right? It almost feels like they just are pulling names out of hats to make crossovers now in comics.
It's true, and sometimes they make perfect sense. You know, it's like the fact that we haven't had a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Daredevil crossover yet doesn't make any sense.
Right.
But they have met, Batman and so forth.
But they just did Power Rangers meets Godzilla, and you're like, well, of course. Like,
well, that makes sense, and I don't even like the Power Rangers.
But I'm saying
I would read
that
it.
one makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But then also just because the companies work together, we have Justice League versus Kong versus Godzilla, and you're like,
yeah,
okay.
And you're like, thanks Warner Brothers and Legendary Pictures for having that happen. So
that
makes sense. That's synergy.
Yeah, that's what you really love. We're here to talk about your love of corporate synergy.
Not really, but occasionally corporate synergy does give me what I want.
Yes,
but
indeed.
it's rare.
Well, what's something else? What's the next one you got there?
Okay, the next thing is actually a toy.
I'm not surprised to hear this.
Yeah, but this one again, I may have mentioned it to you in the past. This was extremely formative. When I was a kid, what I really wanted to do, eventually it became clear to me that people made comics.
Right.
Because when you're very small, you don't think of a writer and an artist, and it's just there's the comic and you read it, it's awesome. Once I became aware of it, I wanted to make comics and I wanted to be in comics. My young brain did translate that into being an artist, which it took a long time. It took until I was in art school for me to realize I have some talent and I do somewhat enjoy art, but I do not have the chops to be a professional comic artist. So Ibrahim,
well, I think
I salute.
I think that's something, if you go back into one of the interviews I did with him, Ibrahim and I have talked about, which is lots and lots of people are incredibly good artists, but being a professional comics artist means you need to be equally good at drawing everything. You need to be able to draw
that's it.
A horse, a car, a cityscape, everything. It's
more important than even the skill to do that is the enthusiasm to do that.
Right.
The only reason, this is what I discovered going to art school, is that I discovered that the only reason I wanted to draw comics was to tell the stories. And then I was like, oh, so it was literally painful for me to sit down and draw a house or the interior or cars or trees because I just wanted to get to the story. And I did not have the temperament of someone like Ibrahim, who's a professional, who knows that and is fine with creating all that. Yep. He probably has things he hates to draw, but at the same time, there's a temperament and there's definitely a discipline, and I didn't have it. That said, my imagination has always been a combo of the two. I try to write things pretty visually because I see it. Even when I'm writing stuff for stage and spoken word, I'm still seeing pictures in my head because to me, it's all the same. Right. So anyway, number 2 is something called The Mighty Men and Monster Maker.
I'm vaguely aware of what this is.
Came out in 1979, so again, I was 10, and talk about, oh my God, straight to the vein for me. What it was someone being very smart about, they used to have a thing, they may still, for aimed at girls, and I don't mean made only, but aimed at girls, called fashion plates. And what it was you had these plates of raised drawings of heads, then torsos, and then legs, and fashion plates would be like a different top, a different skirt, maybe some pants, maybe there's a thing here with a hat or whatever, and you could endlessly, because you had multiples, flip them over, swap them out, change them around, and you would put this guide on top of it with a piece of paper there, and then you'd do a rubbing. And the rubbing would just be the outline of the thing you made. And then you could color it with colored pencils or whatever. So that was fashion plates. And then they said, maybe we should do one for boys. And Mighty Men and Monster Maker, still to this day, I mean, I should probably find one on eBay and get it. It was various heads, torsos, legs of superhero figures, monsters, clearly, and all kinds of creatures. So you could have like a very handsome superhero head with a mask, but suddenly he's got a wolfman body, and then for legs, like some sort of robot, whatever.
That sounds cool.
And it was totally cool. And then you would do your rubbing, and you would, in my case, color them, but I would also name them and come up with their backstories. And
produce a
that
4-issue comics miniseries, but no.
Essentially, I mean, I was always thinking of story for each one of them.
Of course.
I had a 3-ring binder when I was a kid. Of course, all that's gone thanks to Hurricane Katrina. But this 3-ring binder, that was hundreds of them, and swapping them out and doing this and that, and all with names. I remember maybe 4 or 5 of them, but and they all had stories. And that was a thing where was inspirational to me, because it was I didn't have to literally draw the figures. They were well drawn, by the way. Whoever was the artist for them, they were well done. But it was a way to skip the painful part, which was actually having to sit down and draw. It also did instruct me a lot about proportion and so forth. So when I did draw, it improved my drawing and my ideas of anatomy, superhero anatomy. Come on, but
the only one that matters.
And why it was inspirational was it put me in the captain's chair. It was where I was like, I can create these things. It made it attainable. Right. That I could sit there and say, I love all these characters, but I can come up with my own. Here's Space Knight. That's one of the ones I remember. And that was before ROM. That was before the toy ROM Space Knight came out. No. But I mean, it was basically, I had all those characters, and I suddenly was like, I could be a comic maker. So that was a big one.
Yeah, that's great. No, I think that, I mean, for me, that was people just buying me generic superhero things.
Yeah.
I didn't make them, but it was like, but it forced me. I'm like, I don't know who the hell this guy is. So I'd have to create something for him to be villain or whatever. Yeah, it's a similar thing. Yeah, it is.
There are apps now that are kind of the same thing. There are literal, like, create your own hero apps where you do that. Sense. They're in stock poses and you get to change out their outfits. I don't think it's as fun because the tactile thing is pretty awesome.
You know, today's kids, it's all about screens, right? Hey.
Enjoy your eye cancer. I don't know. Is that what you get from looking at the screens? Eye cancer?
That sounds right to me. This is not a medical show.
So anyway, that's number 2.
All right.
That was a big one.
All right. Let's hit me with another one. What do you got?
Should I hit you with my best shot?
Yes. Fire away.
Thank you, Ms. Benatar. I will.
And weirdly, your next choice is Pat Bennett. No.
This one is an obvious one, and this one actually comes right on the heels of this. And actually, it came out the year before, which means I was 9 when I got this. And Ibrahim would know this. I think anyone. How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way.
I had this book too, and I pretty quickly was like, if it took you to college, it took me to age 4 to be like, nope.
Well, I mean, the thing is, like any instructional thing, it pays to return to it, and it pays to just keep getting at it.
Yeah.
And I did have a passion to draw better, because I would look at the comics and go, if I want to do this, then I need to be better. And I knew that I had an eye, but I needed to study. And that book, weirdly, kind of very important for like a whole generation, because nothing like it had existed before.
Right.
there were what was that company? Walt something or other, famous for these pamphlet, oversized how-to
Yeah.
instructional drawing books and painting books. And I can't remember, Walt Foster? Maybe it is Foster. But anyway, they would have things like how to cartoon, but
Yeah.
none of them were about comics. It was about, either doing photorealistic trees and portraits or how to draw Pluto, that kind of thing. And you're like, okay.
Yeah.
So this was specific and a genius idea that someone over at Marvel, and I'm not going to give Stan the full credit,
It was me. It was Stan.
but it was illustrated by John Buscema, who was the guy of the time.
Can't go wrong there.
Well, you can. No, I'm a fan of Buscema. That was weird when I did
You were
this.
about to shit talk John Buscema? What was that? No.
No, I never liked his faces. He drew everyone very simian and always this big, long upper lip thing, which made them look ape-like. Made Conan look perfect. He was always perfect on Conan.
Buscema on Conan. Fantastic.
And Hulk. Anytime you draw Hulk, you're like, that works.
Sort of
but when he would draw
muscle-bound,
handsome guys, it's like
animalistic, full of rage characters. Yeah.
and big guys.
Big guys.
Really big guys.
He liked a muscle dude.
So, but also was illustrated with examples from classic Kirby, especially when they're doing things about panel layout and how to make a dynamic pose and things like that. So I took it to heart. Doesn't mean that when I was a kid at 9 with this book, I mainly traced a lot, but tracing is a big part of learning your skills. Because just like with Mighty Men and Monster Maker, you're seeing someone who is farther advanced than you, and by tracing what they're doing, you are copying. You're like, I get a feel for where a head should sit on shoulders and a neck, and how long arms should be, and that sort of thing. But also, it did touch on storytelling. So that was great. It wasn't just about you want to make your action pose this exciting. It was like going, well, look how this page is laid out. So it really did get into the comic storytelling. And I worshipped that book for so long. The one thing I will bring up that I've brought up before, I used to bring it up at Powell's when I worked at the bookstore, and it would come across the table. I'd always say, they have never fixed this. Maybe, are you going to include some graphics in this? You should.
Sure, yeah, I will. Yeah, of course.
Do the back cover of How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way.
Yeah.
Which is a, I think, pretty tossed off picture of Spider-Man with a beret, and he's got like brushes and stuff and pens in his hand, like, I'm drawing comics. It's great.
Yeah.
But in his, let me see, I think left eye, in the mask, there is a mistake that someone, just a little drop of ink, which almost makes it look like a weird pupil.
Like that.
They have never fixed that since 19. All the because that book is still in print. They keep bringing it out, and no one has gone back.
Especially in today's world, where like that's a split second in Photoshop to go bloop, and just
that is exactly it. And I just want to go, guys, can we fix that? It bugged me as a kid. It bugs me today.
What I love is giant corporations like that. It's not a cost thing. It's just what? Who cares? Like,
but it also that's as you know of my personality.
Yeah.
Detail and I'm a nitpicker.
A nitpick? Yeah.
And that's literally a nit
Yeah.
that could easily be picked. Just get it.
Well, that is very funny. I do like stuff like that.
So that book was very formative. And again, I'm talking a lot about art as if I ended up being an artist, which I didn't. But these things were inspiring all along the way. The idea that I can myself create stories and use those characters, even though I don't have the rights, or create my own, which I love doing too. I'm not strictly all about doing IP, but I do love those classic characters. Anyway.
Well, I do think similar to anyone who takes that jump from fan of something to wanting to work in it and or create it, as soon as that veil is lifted at all, it's why I always talk about, and other people my age, we grew up in the DVD comment. We went to DVD commentary school, where all of a sudden it's like, oh, hey man, I should get a notebook out because they're giving us all the goods on how you do this stuff. All of a sudden that it makes it like, oh, these are just people doing something. Well, if they can do it, I can do it, right?
Had I grown up in that era, who knows? I might have been more focused on film, even though I've written a lot of screenplays. I've never wanted to direct.
Yeah.
I've never wanted to direct.
That was pretty quickly where I shifted from I can't draw it. Can I make people do it in front of a camera? And then
it's the same thing where it's like I am not able to draw it to a level I want to, but I can write the hell out of the story.
Yeah.
You know, it's like just get me an artistic collaborator.
There you go.
By the way, give me a ring.
Currently available now.
All right, so here's another obscure one. I'll end on the easy one.
Okay.
So
right.
Here's the other obscure one.
Obscure one.
It is a book also, but this is Doc Savage, His Apocalyptic Life by Philip Jose Farmer.
We've talked a lot about this book and his work on other shows, especially if you're listening to our Pulp Heroes season of IP Squad that is currently running when this episode is coming out. So you can't talk about Pulp Heroes without talking about this guy.
You can't talk about Pulp Heroes without Philip Jose Farmer. You also can't really talk about fan fiction. The thing is that, again, that term didn't exist.
Right.
But Philip Jose Farmer, who happened to be a very talented writer, he was an unabashed nerd for all the characters he ever loved. And while he's creating the Riverworld series, which, by the way, is one of your ultimate crossover series, because that has fictional characters and real-life people, and they're all meeting in the great beyond and on Riverworld, and you're like, oh, great, it's Mark Twain hanging out with, King Arthur, and you're like, what? My mind's melting. But while he's doing that, he's also studiously going through all those pulps. And the original one he did was Tarzan Alive, which I like as well, but Tarzan I'm not as huge a fan of as I am of Doc Savage. So the second one. But basically what Philip Jose Farmer was doing was he wanted to write the official biographies of these characters where he combined everything. He combined every story and novel of Tarzan or Doc Savage to make a full narrative, and he started this idea that they were all related, all of his favorite characters. And he introduces that in Tarzan Alive and then carries it further in Doc Savage. And essentially he comes up with his own universe, which is called the Wold Newton Universe, named after a real little village in England that back in 17 some odd whatever had a meteor strike. And Philip Jose Farmer's whole idea was there were two carriages of wealthy people and their drivers who happened to be passing by when the meteor strike happened, and the radiation from the meteor strike basically influenced their genes. And the descendants of all those people in the carriages end up being everyone you've ever heard of. So it's basically Doc Savage is a cousin to Tarzan distantly, and Fu Manchu and James Bond, and it's not just the pulps, it's everybody. The Shadow, obviously. I think as much as I love what he did, he went way too far. Having like everybody be related. I'm like,
everybody eventually go too far? It's because decades later after this, you get Alan Moore with his League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, which was
clearly inspired by
awesome.
It.
And then similarly, by the end of that, you're like, what are we talking about anymore?
I know. And the thing with like this particular book is that it was tricky for me to choose this for the 5 simply because I love it. It's great. But it also inspired things that further inspired me, like Kim Newton's Anno Dracula series.
Yes,
which
I was also thinking about that, and especially
where they're not all related, but it is a mishmash of everybody.
It treats it as a real place, though, right? It paints this vision of England where everything you know from that time period and subsequent time periods in other books is real.
Oh, he just starts with it starts from the basic premise that Dracula wins at the end of Dracula instead of being defeated. And then because of that, the world changes, yet the events of world history still kind of happen, but with vampires. And he spreads out from there, and he just includes references to real and fictional characters, so they're all inhabiting the same universe.
Is that maybe objectively, in terms of quality, the best version of this kind of work? In my opinion, it might be. I
love it. It's very uneven.
I guess some as it goes forward. Like Anno Dracula, the first one.
Anno Dracula, unbelievable.
Amazing.
Bloody Red Baron, great.
Yeah.
When he gets to what is it? Dracula Cha Cha Cha.
Yeah, Dracula Cha Cha Cha. Yeah.
Yeah, the one that's set in Rome in the 60s, where his main focus there is bringing in all these characters from like La Dolce Vita and Knights of Cabiria, and you're like,
it's the same
okay.
trajectory that we're talking about with Farmer and Moore too. It just gets too big. They get too big for their britches.
They just can't stop.
Yeah.
And they're like, where does it go from there?
Yeah.
But I do think it's highly successful, and I love League of Extraordinary Gentlemen too. So all of that is in the same vein.
It's great.
It's right back to me with giant-sized Spider-Man. It's just like,
everyone knows.
Are you kidding me? They all live in the same world?
Yeah.
And it's people that have done the hell out of the research to make it work. And you sit there going like, all right, you might have to fudge some stuff, but yes, this person could have been at college at the same time this person was, and they could have met.
I feel like
blah,
that's
blah,
a very important thing to Brendan Jones. It's not
it
just
is.
that you're not just doing it haphazardly.
No. That in the stuff I've written where, again, I'll bring up another story I wrote, which is the Doc Holliday Jack the Ripper.
I do enjoy that one.
Story.
Yeah, that one's great too.
That one, that's not existing IP. Those are historical figures. We don't know who Jack the Ripper was. That gave me a lot of leeway. But I was looking at time frames. Like, could he have been in America briefly at this period before the murders? Like, he's training himself while he's in America, and he goes back to England when he's ready to start his work. I'm like, okay, that's cool. And where did Doc Holliday fit in? And the facts of the story, other than a couple of made up people, it all worked historically, and I felt very proud of that. Whereas anyone could have just written a story where Doc Holliday in 1880 whatever is walking around and whoops, there's a guy killing a lady, and he could have been in Dodge City, and you're like, no, he wasn't in Dodge. that wouldn't.
I think
there are people that wouldn't care, and I just care. Yeah,
you do. I think I've recommended this to you before, and I can't remember if you actually did read it, but the Star Trek on the Planet of the Apes comic crossover,
which I've still never read.
You would love it, because whoever wrote that, and I'm sorry I can't remember who did, really figured out, okay, this is the exact moment in the Planet of the Apes movies that the Enterprise could show up and not damage what happens with those. And also, we're going to find an exact point in Kirk's 5-year mission where this could... And, like, they did it in such a way that it made sense and didn't damage either of the franchise. You're like, that could be canon. And I was amazed.
That's exactly how I would approach it.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, by the way, folks, if I'm talking way too much about the goofy fan fiction, I'm proud of it. It's actually quite good, he said, patting himself on the back. But at the same time, I do other things.
Of course. Those are all mentioned
story,
in the intro. Don't worry. We'll get all your real
the story
credits,
I did. Thank you. The story I did with Rockford and Kolchak. One of the things I'm proudest of was I literally found a place between two early episodes of both series where they could have crossed over, and I referenced what was happening in the previous episode of Rockford and the one after. He's got a bandage on his head from having a bullet grazed off his skull in the previous episode, and he's got that through the entirety of my story. But they could have slotted, and it also is the two episodes I'm referencing were both from October of 1974. So I mean, it was just, I went, yes, boom, I found my slot. And you could insert that story within either one of the actual TV series, and it would not alter with either series, except for the fact that Rockford would never have brought up, okay, something weird happened, and there may have been vampires.
I think vampires might be real, Angel. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah. Oh, I would have loved that. Oh, and Angel would have been the guy who bought it.
Sure, Jim, of course.
Yeah.
Shit,
okay,
I met
vampires, Jimmy.
I met a werewolf last week. What are you talking about?
And actually, perfect segue.
Oh,
what do you think the next one is?
Is it Kolchak the Night Stalker?
Bingo bongo.
Yeah.
It's the one I thought you would get.
Yeah, because we did an entire podcast about it, and I think it would, like, I don't know if it would make my 5, but it would certainly make my 10 on my longer list.
For me, as being formative. I mean, again, being a kid when these came out. You may have seen episodes of it when you were a kid, also, because it's a rerun for you.
Mine, just based on generation, Kolchak probably get pushed up by X-Files if I was talking about.
Oh
my
yeah, of course.
influences.
And I love X-Files, but
Yeah.
X-Files I always saw as, it's a successor, but
Yeah.
it can't outshine something that made its impact when I was a kid.
Oh, because like if you're just getting into like objective quality, like the high highs of X-Files are way higher than the high highs
Oh,
of Night Stalker.
absolutely.
We've talked about this, but that being said, I do. I mean, we once again see our patron show Nights talking
Yes.
about it, where we just
Nights talking.
gush
Yeah.
over it. And one thing we agree on: no notes on the performance of Darren McGavin.
No. And that's one of the reasons I put it on the list. I mean, obviously, it fits into my love of supernatural and creepy stuff and the horror genre. And it was on TV, which at the time, that was not the case. You would occasionally get, the 70s were rife with really creepy TV movies, actually. But the idea of a weekly series where we got to see different monsters and the same guy fighting them, what was really formative about it was, even as a kid, because when it's on TV, I am again like 5 years old,
Right.
and it only lasted a season. I became much more familiar with it in years to come because it continued to be rerun on TV, CBS, whatever, like late night stuff. So I'd seen it the same 20 episodes, plenty. But what it really brought home is, even as a kid, all stuff with vampires and werewolves and blah, 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 were almost always presented as Universal films or Hammer films. They
Right.
were all period pieces. The people who fought the creatures, our heroes, were always, men of science or what. You had
Professors,
Van
right? Yeah.
Helsing's,
Yeah.
and they're always great. Actually, we rarely have bad Van Helsings, but we, of course, have our favorites like Mr. Peter Cushing.
Peter Cushing.
But,
Not that we don't stand a Van Sloan as well.
Oh, no, absolutely.
He's wonderful.
But that was the stock. That's always the idea. And so this show comes along, and our hero is in the modern day, for me, when I was a kid in the
Yeah.
70s. And he's not typical. And again, that was inspirational because it showed me comics are the only problem with them, generally speaking, if you're into American mainstream superhero comics. They're superheroes.
Right.
You can love them, but you can't really be them. And sometimes they would have, like, Jimmy Olsen gets a heroic moment. Great, Jimmy. But still,
Yeah.
Snapper Carr. But
Greatest character ever created, Snapper Carr.
Kolchak the Night Stalker was the first time it was a normal guy. And what's more, a guy who's frequently very afraid.
Yeah.
And yet he does the work. And he saves the day. And that ingrained itself because I love to write things where the hero is not necessarily the guy you'd expect. Because, and maybe that's wishful fulfillment too. It's me putting myself in Mary suing. It's like, okay, it's a schlub who saves the day.
I think it's very telling that you did pair him up with Rockford because they're similar in that these are not the guys. They're not setting out to be the action heroes. They're not the guys that anyone would go to first, but they're the only guys who are there, and they have a moral code that's going to make them go, I got to do this.
Plus, the tones of both shows are so close. I was like, yeah, they would totally fit together.
They could have swapped roles, honestly. McGavin could have been Rockford, and Garner could have been Kolchak.
Except for Garner would literally have been like kicking like that swamp creature in the Nards or something, because he was a more active dude.
He was a more active dude, but they have there's a similar core to them.
Oh, I mean, Jim Rockford is constantly getting conked, knocked out.
Yeah.
He's definitely, he reminds me of the Spirit. As in the hero that always has the bloodied lower lip,
but
and
also
his clothes are torn.
Both guys are guys who are like, okay, fine, I got it.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
I got to do it. I'm the only guy who can do it.
I don't want to do this at all, but sure, I'm here and I have to.
So, I mean, Kolchak the Night Stalker, as we covered in our podcast, is not a pinnacle of television by any means. And its lows are pretty damn low because that budget was cheap, and they never really figured out the idea of making it have overarching storylines, so they just
I think
reset the
I
button.
think
That was a
one
big
of the
mistake.
big things that obviously there was a lot of things that made the X-Files a success where Kolchak
Yes.
wasn't. But one of them was a guy had a vision. There was no Chris Carter on Kolchak. Nobody was
Right.
there to go, here is what we're doing. It's more like, isn't this a
Also,
cool
they
idea?
just never. Back then, there weren't too many
No.
shows at all, including classic stuff like Columbo and Rockford Files and stuff
Yeah.
like that, which are top of the line. But they did not really want to follow the life of the character. The
No.
character would end up in another similar storyline and amaze you and be awesome, but they wouldn't refer to each
As
other.
you know,
They wouldn't.
I often am watching. I'm constantly rewatching like 70s detective shows, and anytime that there is any continuity, I'm like, whoa, whoa,
mind blown.
Holy
Anytime
God.
that Beth, the lawyer, would bring
Yeah.
up like, I just had to get you out of jail 2 weeks ago,
Yeah.
and you're like, I saw that episode, and
That did
it's
happen.
rare.
You're
Yeah,
right,
it happened.
Beth.
It really did.
Yeah.
So I mean that was formative mainly because it goes straight to me, straight
Yeah.
to the heart, and then it's something that's carried forward even if I'm not consciously calling Kolchak into play.
Yeah.
Which I would love to, by the way. Again, give me a call.
Let's
that's something I love.
We've long talked about wanting to reboot Kolchak in the right way.
In the right way.
Yes,
We
they-
won't do
yeah.
any talking about what happened in the 90s.
No, that was a fine show. It just wasn't Kolchak. If you want to make a dark, grim Avenger monster hunter,
He had a
show-
yellow car.
Yeah. Oh, I take it back. It's very much Kolchak then.
Yeah. But anyway,
Yeah.
I think that wraps it up.
Yeah.
And the surprise was I didn't bring up Superman.
You
What?
didn't bring up Superman. Can I get a little Superman talk from you? Do you
It's
remember?
all I can say is
Do you remember a formative moment? Do you remember?
Yes.
Okay, that's good because I actually. The thing with me in comics and all, I have no memory of seeing these characters for the first time. They've just been with me my whole life.
well, I don't remember seeing the character
See,
for the
but
first
like
time.
where you really clicked in with Superman.
And I don't remember
we'll make this
what my
an
first comic was
We'll
or any
make
of
this
that.
an addendum only because I know how much you love the character. So it's there's kind of a six.
Man, because that I could have done just a top 5 of Superman related
Yeah,
things, but
totally.
here it is, and this is a very personal memory.
Yeah.
And that is, I think it was, maybe this was, I think this was for me that she did it. My mom, through my brother, asked for a superhero themed birthday party one year when he was maybe 8, which I probably would have been like 5 or whatever. And my mom took it upon herself because at the time, this is in the 70s, they didn't have, well, there were probably a few mass produced superhero posters, but not in Macomb, Mississippi, you're not going to find them.
Right.
She recreated pictures from the comics because my mom, that's where I get the artistic stuff from. She is talented enough to be able to do it, and she would there was Flash, and she was she didn't care DC or whatever. She did one of Vigilante, which may have been my special request, whatever. And they were
love
just
that
to be
guy.
hung up around the walls while we had the superhero party and there was the superhero cake and all that stuff. Later, and I think maybe just for me, and she practiced oil painting. She took a wooden block and she gave it just a white glossy back. And then she did an oil painting of Superman for me. And it was based on the classic painting of Superman that for a long time hung in the DC offices. And it's from the 50s or something. And it's just the classic arms akimbo pose, that thing. And she recreated it. And it was watching my mom paint. Here's the thing. Anytime I would watch my mom draw or paint, transcendent for me. I would giggle. Not because it was funny. I just was, there was pure joy because seeing her create that, and I know that she wasn't amazing, but it was just, that was the tingle. It was the same watching my dad play guitar and sing because it was basically all the creativity in me was being sparked in that moment. So watching my mom, who hates these characters, doesn't like comics, but she very nicely created this, and I had that for a long time.
Wow.
Again, Katrina destroyed it, but it was, I mean, it was only yay big,
Still,
but it was it was seeing that character that I loved above all others, and my mom recreating it for me, and it was in my room forever, and I kept it for so long. Unbelievable. It was where I felt like Superman's in my house.
Yeah.
Because in the comics form, I bought it at the Pick and Pack, Macomb, Mississippi's Pick and Pack was where Robin and I bought our comics off the spinner rack. Hey, kids, comics.
Yep.
But that came from outside. This was, again, an example of anyone can do this. And look at my mom making Superman for me. So that was a huge thing for me.
Indeed.
But as far as the character himself, from the first comic, I'm hooked.
Yep.
And we had Adventures of Superman reruns all the time. We had Super Friends. We had plenty of Superman cartoons because all the other ones, the Filmation ones from back in the day. And then, of course, and Ruby Spears, but that was 80s. And then, of course, Superman the movie.
Yeah, what are you, 9 when that comes out?
That was 78, so I was 9, exactly.
Yeah.
And mind blown.
Yeah.
He lives. He's on screen.
You believed a man can fly.
Fuck, I believed a man could go back in time and save Lois Lane.
Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah.
Love it. So anyway, the bedrock of Brendan Jones is Superman and Dracula. And that's a weird bedrock, but that's it.
And all those things come together to we're here though. You're on here, of course, because we're promoting something we're both part of and have been for a while, which is the Tesla City Stories, which you direct and act in. I'm one of the actors in it as well. And our new season is premiering soon, which is what we want to tell people about.
The thing where this again, the Venn diagram is. Talk about IP that was overlooked, but also talk about something that is a blended universe.
Yes.
So rare in 1940s radio, in fact, pretty much non-existent except for what the Tesla Broadcasting Company did. So the fact that we get to, several times a year, do these radio shows for audiences after so long, but it's one huge story. That always kills me, because it's like, wow, the Wraith, the supernatural crime fighter, his secretary is the daffy, would-be Chanteuse.
Some shows were there crossover episodes of stuff at all?
Not really.
No,
I mean, Lone Ranger and Green Hornet, there was the briefest of mentions in like the first Green Hornet episodes.
They're retroactively connected, yeah, right?
No, not retroactively. Literally, Green Hornet was built to be a descendant of Lone Ranger.
Yeah,
so they mentioned that in the very first episode.
They're connected in concept, I should say, not in not like
they
together,
couldn't meet each other because of the time
frames. But it's not like Green Hornet ever crossed paths with the Shadow or anything like that.
No, none of that stuff ever happened. I think the most you get was occasionally in the comedies, if someone was like the Great Gildersleeve might have like a cameo walkthrough of something.
Yeah.
But
I mean, you never had Perry Mason meet Dr. Kildare or something like that?
No.
Just so.
It was just not a concept.
Yeah, I know. No, no one was thinking that, but retroactively you do go, what missed opportunities?
What missed opportunities? Because I in one of our intros did bring up, it's like, dude, how awesome would it have been if Little Orphan Annie at one point gets saved by the Shadow? I'm like, come on.
I mean, that, and you don't even have to make a thing out of it. That's the cool thing about Tesla, is there will just be, like you talk about, it's not like nobody's going like, Viola from
No, they just built it in,
exists.
And if a character from one show fit in a storyline for another show, they're there. Yeah. They're just not ignoring those connections, which I think is great. It's not like P.I. Jack Wilde is solving mysteries in other shows. He just happens to be dating Viola and all that kind of stuff.
Right, yeah.
So I love it. But yes, thank you for pitching that. We are in our 10th year.
Crazy.
Technically. Yeah, and coming back for our second season of the year, we kind of do our years in two chunks.
Yep.
So September 13th, Friday the 13th here in Portland.
Spooky. It's not a spooky show at all,
though. We're doing a couple of episodes of a show from the TBC that we don't have a lot of episodes of, but it's our second time visiting with the Harpy Squadron, which is basically, for those comics fans out there, it's like a female Blackhawks that was a radio show pretty cool and progressive for its day because it's 5 female pilots who have affiliated with no country, but fighting the Axis with their cool special planes. So we're gonna have a couple episodes of that and the soap opera we always do, Nightingale of the Broken Heart. So that is very fun for me. It's digging up old stuff and giving it a modern polish and bringing it to audiences that hopefully are enjoying it. 10 years in, we keep selling out, so we must be doing something right.
It's popular. So yeah, that's September 13th, 7:30 at the Old Church Concert Hall here in Portland, Oregon.
Book your flights now.
Yeah, you can get your tickets on TeslaStories.com. Am I correct on that?
TeslaCityStories.com or
Tesla
TeslaTix, TIX.
TeslaTix.com. Of course, we'll put those links in the
Yes.
description below. But of course, if
Come
you're
see
not,
John and me. We'll be acting and stuff.
you can see us
Though
do
it's
live.
really ladies' night. Oh, yes, it's ladies'
Hey,
night. Speaking of the
that's-
70s and the feelings. Right.
Yeah, that's got. But now I'm gonna get sued, but for
This
that.
is now top 6.
Now I got-
because
yeah.
that also inspired
Oh
me.
yeah,
that song.
yeah. And also, once again, I'm gonna have to pay royalty rights on that now. Thanks.
Don't
Now-
worry about it.
Yeah, we're
They're
gonna
all
get a
dead.
copyright strike for that. But of course, if you're not in the Portland area and can't visit, you can listen to episodes of Tesla City Stories that we should mention.
Yes.
There's a Tesla City Stories podcast.
Thank you. Because I was like, is it just Tesla City Stories podcast? Turns out
I think it is
Thank
just the
you.
Tesla City Stories podcast, which you can get on anywhere you get podcasts.
Yeah,
And there's a new
that
season
is
of
something
that
that there will be more episodes. We promise.
Yeah, but there's a full season of episodes on there,
Yes.
including some extra little tidbits and behind the scenes stuff too.
Yeah, some cool interviews.
So yeah. Well, Brendan, thank you so much for dropping in, and of course, I should also mention Brendan can be heard here across the Punch Up Entertainment Network. We
Way too
co-host every week. Campbell and Jones Meet the Monsters. You're currently guest co-hosting on the IP Squad with your brother Robin as we continue through those Pulp Hero movies. You also, I also should mention, you do another podcast outside of the network as well called Prodigious Saps with you and your friend Chad talking all things nerdy and pop culture-y.
All things that occur to our old brains, with a decided focus on Superman, because Chad I've known for 35 years, a long time.
We're gonna have
we've-
Chad on here. Chad's gonna come on and do this.
We
show.
definitely should.
Yeah. And
but
Robin
we,
as well.
We bonded over Superman. We were younger and both rock musicians in Houston.
And nothing more rock and roll than Superman, baby.
No, I mean, we were, again, nerdy rockers.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you, Brendan.
Thank you. It was fun.
And that was my conversation with the hilarious and talented Brendan Jones. Once again, you can head to TeslaTix.com to get tickets to the Tesla City Stories live here in Portland, Oregon. Or check out the Tesla City Stories podcast wherever you subscribe to podcasts. Also, be sure to hear Brendan and I discuss classic monster movies every week on Campbell and Jones Meet the Monsters, which is right here on the Punch Up Entertainment Network. And of course, you're going to want to be sure to like, comment, and subscribe below. Ring that bell for notifications. But that will do it for this episode of Give Me 5. I'm John Campbell, and I'll catch you on the flip side.